Hello everyone, and welcome to the webinar Charting the Life Course. My name is Diane Burns and I'm the Interim Director here at the Spina Bifida Coalition of Cincinnati. I'm joined by our Technical Advisor, Jeremy Moses.
Good evening, everybody.
I would now like to introduce Celia Schloemer, the Family Support Coordinator with the UC University Center of Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, who is teaching here in Greater Cincinnati this nationally recognized framework that helps families develop a vision for a good life.
Hi everyone, my name is Celia Schloemer and I'm the Family Support Coordinator at the UC UCED, and welcome to an overview of Charting the Life Course. I want to take a minute to let you know as far as the folks that have brought this training to you and have made it available here in Ohio. We are very grateful for the many busy hands at the UC UCED, at the Ohio State Nysonger UCED, who are responsible for providing these trainings and introducing families and professionals to this framework. In addition, we're very grateful to the Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities for their funding that support this project. Very quickly, I want to tell you about myself. I am the Family Support Coordinator at the UC UCED, and I've been in this position for about a year. And in that work, I have been given the responsibility of making sure I support families across the state of Ohio, primarily for this project in Southern Ohio and in Northeast Ohio. I have many reasons why I come to this work, but as you look at this slide, you will meet those folks that are most near and dear to me that you'll get to know a little later, who bring me to this work. In the upper right-hand corner is my sister, Mary Virginia. In the little black and white to the left of her is my sister-in-law, Kim. In the lower right-hand corner is my niece, Grace. And then in the middle are my children. And actually, primarily for me, becoming part of the work in the disabilities community came from my own children and their nuances that make them them. But we realized and we look back that disability has been part of my family culture for a long time. Let's take a minute to have you all introduce yourselves and let us know who we have on the webinar.
All right, we do want to find out who is with us today. We're launching a polling question right now. Please select the appropriate response and click submit. All right, we are now going to close the poll and let me share the results. Looks like 83% of you, the majority, responded with adulthood, and the other 17% are transitioning out of high school. And now I will turn it back over to Celia.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'm not surprised at the results of that poll. It is frequent that in this work we are finding families in transition and adulthood that latch onto this work. I think often that is because we are looking for things to do and how to have an impact most on what we do all day. And this framework is a great tool for that. So let's get started. So what is the LifeCourse Framework? I want to take a minute. I'm going to do the worst presentation thing that you can do, and I'm going to read this slide, but I think it's really important to look at it closely. So the LifeCourse Framework was created by families to help individuals and families of all abilities and all ages develop a vision for a good life. Think about what they need to know and do, identify how to find or develop supports, and discover what it takes to live the lives they want to live. And I think that I can share with you in this work, as we present it across the state, there are certain things that really stand out to participants when they look at this description of the framework itself. The LifeCourse Framework was created by families, and that was very intentional. This work was developed around the idea of looking closely at family support and how we support families across the life course. And so the fact that families were an integral part of creating this framework was very important and very intentful. In addition, participants often talk about the fact that it's families of all abilities and all ages. And we'll talk more in depth about the all of this framework as we move through this webinar. Also, developing a vision for a good life. That piece is important in the sense that often when we are families dealing with disability, we put vision on the back burner. We cautiously dream. We cautiously identify wants and needs. And we really talk about how It's important for families to have the life they want to live, to really be brave enough to bring that back to the forefront of the work that they're doing. And thinking about what they need to know and how to find or develop supports, I think right now, and we'll talk about as we work through this, it does feel somewhat like a mystery when we try to navigate the systems that are attached to disability. And this framework really tries to embrace where families are in that work and help them kind of fill in gaps and do that work more efficiently. And then finally, discovering the lives they want to live. And that piece, especially when I'm working with self-advocates, becomes a big piece of it, because often as people move through the life course, especially people with disability, there's a lot of voices that talk about the shoulds, or what they want to do, or what they should want to do, or what they can't do. And this idea that we're really trying to pay attention to the lives that the individual wants to live becomes very important to the participants. So the primary core belief of the life course work is this idea that all people and their families have the right to live, love, work, play, and pursue their life aspirations in the community. And this belief really drives this work. And this work has grown across the nation into a community of practice that takes this on as their core belief, that all people and their families have the right to live, love, work, and play, and pursue their life aspirations in their community. But we also know that the services and supports in the disability system have changed across time. And we know now that we're talking a lot about being in the community, but we also know that across time that has looked very different for families. And so even when I look at my own family and I look at the timeline across time, it's very interesting to watch the growth of the service system and how we looked at disability. My sister Mary Virginia was born in 1950. And Mary Virginia lived in our family home. She was the oldest of 7. She was my mother's first child, and she lived in our home for 9 months. And then, at the direction of her doctor, she placed my sister in an institution. And they said, please give her to us. We will take care of her. We know best. This is more than you can take on. Interestingly enough, my sister-in-law Kim, who was born in 1965, her parents, my in-laws, were told the exact same thing. And my in-laws said, no, she's coming home with us. And this was the first time we were beginning to hear a family voice saying what they wanted to look into as possibilities for their loved one. And so Kim came home and lived in the family home. Now, my niece Grace was born in 1998. And in 1998, no one told my brother and my sister-in-law to place Grace outside the home. They said, take her home and love her. And that's what they did. And in fact, the Greater Cincinnati Down Syndrome Association was at the hospital providing information to them about how they could support their daughter moving forward and making that connection for them. So family support was, again, moving more to the forefront. And I think primarily, in a lot of ways, driven by families asking for and needing more and using their voice to get more. So this last image that I'm presenting here as the last point on my timeline is in fact the image for the LifeCourse Framework. And I place this here because, and I place the date of 2012 there, because as a part of a group of stakeholders across the United States that came together in 2012 and began to have a conversation around what it really means to be supporting families and how are we doing that and where are we doing it well. And the report that resulted from that, the Wingspread report, became an important document in this work that we're doing now with charting the life course and the community of practice around disability. So, but let's start looking at systems overall and at family systems and community systems. So we know that services and systems or supports have evolved, but if you look to this diagram on the far left, what we know is that this is how most people exist. We are all people who live within a family, within a community. And that community can be a neighborhood, that community can be a church, that community can be a school, various things. But we always are individuals within a core group of a family inside a community. And what we came to discover when we really looked at disability is we discovered that as services were provided to individuals with disability, that they were provided and they kind of surrounded the person, but what we recognized through talking to the stakeholders and the work that was done with the community of practice is that often those services, well-intended and even person-centered, could become a barrier to that person interacting fully as part of the family or as part of the community. And that could simply be in the way they were delivered, because they're not often delivered in our neighborhood, in our community, and if we need or want a particular service, we have to travel to a different location. It could be as simple as it prevents me or makes me different enough than a typical community member that changes the dynamic. One of the examples I always use here is when we've got kids that are supported by individuals in the classroom, often they're called paras, that support is very useful and very important to their learning and their growth, but at the same time it can prevent them from being a direct interactive person within their school community. So ultimately what this community of practice talked about when they took this report from the Wingspread report was to talk about how we can really look at how we support families in a more integrated way, and in a way that those services would be better presented within a community in a way that it didn't become a barrier between the person, their family, and their community. Oops. The other thing that we have to consider is in the way those services are designed, that there's lots of things that come into play there. Services are delivered in a certain way based on lots of different things, based on federal policy, based on federal budgets, based on demand for services, based on the capacity of the current workforce if we're talking about employment, or based on just the expectations and values and the culture of any given community. So those too affect how those services are delivered. So when we look at this National Wingspread report, the intent was to promote a discussion around being intentional with how to support families across the lifespan as primary facilitators of a quality of life that includes interdependence and being fully integrated in the community as independently as possible. So what we have now is this conversation around how we can do that. We know that the disability system can't always give us everything we need, but we also know that in order to support families and in order to support individuals, we need to support families too, and that was the primary focus of the Wingspread report, that we really need to recognize that a lot of the work was already being done by families. So this community of practice was built across the United States on these two premises. One being that we need to support individuals and families of all abilities and all ages to develop their good life vision and identify how they can get the supports that they need and live the lives they want to live. But in addition, we also want to keep in mind that core belief that all people and their families have the right to live, love, work, and play and pursue their life aspirations within the community. So let's take a second and talk about that all people. It's important for us to recognize that in this framework, all people not only means our individuals with disabilities, not only means their families, but also the community. Because if we're really talking about truly being embraced in the community and truly being fully integrated in the community, our community members needed to be supported, because often many of them don't know anything about disability and it becomes uncomfortable. And if we can educate them and make them more familiar with disability, then our opportunities to work in their businesses or participate in their activities is going to be more comfortable. So really, when we look at this framework and we talk about supporting families and supporting individuals with disability and developmental disability, we want to talk about all people. But let's talk a little bit about the 100% and the all of disability. So what we know currently is that out of the 100% of people across the United States that have disability, that currently the national average is that only 25%, that is 1 in 4 individuals, actually have access to the disability service system. 75% of our individuals with disability across the U.S. are not participating in any kind of support from those systems. And the initial response could be, or feeling often is, that this is because there's just not enough. We don't have enough money, energy, time, providers, whatever it is, to really truly support the 100% of people with disability. But what we're finding in the conversation that we're having in the community of practice is that actually out of that 75% that doesn't access them, yes, there are those individuals that can't get services because there are limits on that which is available. But in addition to that, there are individuals that choose not to have services, or there's individuals who don't qualify for services. I'm a prime example of that, as my children, or my daughter, was part of the school-based supports, but when she graduated from high school and finished her college degree, she only had the support of 504, and she lost all her additional support connected with the DD system. So keeping that in mind, we want to kind of talk about, so where do we begin? If we know right now that we currently have a system that may or may not be able to continue to support families financially or with services at a level that's going to continue to meet the demand, if we already know that we've got families who are looking for ways to help their individual family members live and be a meaningful part of their community, where can we start to do this work differently and to move into a new mindset? And so this quote just struck me, and I think it's a perfect segue into this idea of moving along those lines. So the best way to predict the future is to create it. And what we know is when we're trying to create a future or have a vision for a future, we need to do some vision planning. And the Charting the LifeCourse Framework began coming out of this community of practice because they really wanted to say, what do families need in order to help their individual with a disability have a better life? And one of the things that came out of this work and this conversation was this idea of having the ability to identify what a good life looks like. So we began the idea of vision planning, and that the vision planning tool that the Good Life Framework utilizes is referred to as the trajectory. And the trajectory is just that. It's a way to identify how we want to move in an upward motion towards what we want, and how we want to avoid moving towards things that we don't want. So when you stop to think about things that people want in their life, what we define in our current culture as being the good life or things that are desirable, as I present these trainings across the state of Ohio, it becomes very obvious to me that whether you have disability or not, whether you are young or aging, the same things keep coming into play. When we ask individuals and folks to fill out a trajectory and say, what is your good life? What outcomes do you want? It becomes very apparent that we're all very similar. So the themes that we hear is that all of us want friends. We want to be connected to some version of family. That could be blood family or that could be chosen family, but we want to be connected to some version of family. In addition, we often hear that we want enough money. We want a job that we like. We want a home. We might go so far as to say we want vacations. Often people connect to a spiritual or a faith life, and that's a value and something that they seek out in order to feel as if they've got the life they want to live. They want choice. They want freedom. And again, often comes up, they want good health. So, but what is it that's the themes that come through about what they don't want? And again, very similar and often along the same themes, we don't want poverty. We don't want loneliness. We don't want segregation. We don't want restriction. We don't want lack of choice. So what you can notice is that those things that are in our don't wants bubble are kind of the direct opposite of things that we are in our what we want for a good life. And so when we try to identify things that are happening in our lives to ensure that we're headed in the direction that we want, we can better have an idea of whether we're headed there by looking at those types of things. So if we take an example of a trajectory, if one of the goals of the trajectory is to be fully included with my typical classmates in school, and what we want to avoid is difficulty in school, resulting in poor grades or incomplete assignments and not keeping up with our typical peers, we can move along the trajectory and identify those things that might help us better move towards and stay remaining in the classroom full time. But we also know that when we hit a hiccup and we begin to have difficulties in classwork and difficulties keeping up, we run the risk that the school is going to begin to have a conversation and the school teams are going to begin to have a conversation around moving us out of the regular ed classroom potentially to receive direct services to impact that. And what having a vision for inclusion aids us in is we don't want to say we wouldn't want that too, but we can watch how that happens and be more aware of how long we're doing that and in what way we're doing that to be sure that we are honoring the desire for inclusion in the classroom. And so that's just one example of how you can utilize a trajectory to stay on the track that you want to stay. So what does this really mean? It means that any of our life experiences are going to lead to life outcomes. And so recognizing that, we can take this vision statement or this vision of a good life that we have, and we can know that the next step would be to start having and identifying the expectations around that vision and moving through a cycle that helps us stay on board with the vision. So for example, if I have a vision of being a rocket scientist, I know there are certain expectations of someone who wants to be a rocket scientist. So for example, I would be expected to like science. I would be expected to be good at math. I would be expected to enjoy science and math at a level that it's something I want to do pretty often. Then I'm going to create experiences in science and math that help me test that vision. Is it truly what I want? And as I test that vision and create those experiences, I'm going to determine from those experiences where I want to continue. Do I want to continue the vision and create more opportunities around this, or do I want to tweak my vision? And we work through this circle of identifying life experiences that give us new life outcomes that keep us on the trajectory or help us revamp or redesign our trajectory towards whatever good life we're trying to seek out. And what we know then is that experiences and transitions then become points on our life trajectory. So there's natural transitions in life, and then there's experiences that we create. And between these two things, we are going to affect outcomes that are either desired or not desired. So for example, when we look at the trajectory across the life course, and if you see these circular symbols, these are what we call our LifeCourse symbols. And the first one identifies infancy. So we look at things like meeting milestones, and that may be the stage at which someone gets a new diagnosis. We continue up to the early childhood stages. We're learning things like how to say no. We're watching them for additional milestones, and we move through this trajectory. We begin to identify other things that we want to make sure, and this applies to typical children and children with disabilities. We start to join scout groups. We have opportunities to make money, save money, have chores and allowance. As we get older into school age, we might be giving ourselves the opportunity to make mistakes or make choices. We begin our transition planning, which is a huge piece of moving through what will then help us better plan our vision. We also can utilize the LifeCourse tools as we get into adulthood and transitioning into adulthood. We can begin to have expectations of ourselves, having summer jobs, babysitting, doing different high school programs that might give us career and job experience. As we get into adulthood, we might have additional things. Our parents may begin aging, and we need to think about our family members with disability and the impact that that has not only on the individual, but what impact that has on the family as far as them aging. So, and then in addition, losing the support of your parents because they've aged, and now often siblings come into play when we're dealing with disability. So all those pieces move us along the trajectory, and those affect our outcomes. And what we have found in this work is that if we are mindful of what the vision is that we're trying to create and where we're trying to head, we focus on past, present, and future experiences, we're better able to control that trajectory and end up with the life that we want to live. And often we have found that our families dealing with disability are afraid to have the vision. And so I think a good part of this work is saying the vision is powerful in helping you get the life outcomes that you want. And in supporting families, we want to encourage that vision planning. So out of this work and the trajectory, the community of practice began to expand the trajectory and develop a way to recognize past experiences that may have taken us off track, and those past experiences that helped move us through, and future experiences that might keep us on track, and future experiences that we want to avoid. Katie here at the office was able to help me work with her on a trajectory that I would be able to share with you. So when you look here, Katie identified a number of things that were in her vision for a good life. So as we noted that a number of the folks here are in adulthood or potentially in that transition phase, so I'm hoping some of this will speak to you. Katie talked a lot about wanting full-time work, and she has recognized that she appreciates not-for-profit work within the disability community. Katie has a lot of concern around her school loans and handling that financial piece better. She's got some personal work that she wants to do, and getting a driver's license and having a car that she's able to use is very important to her. And so we put that in the box so it was in her mind as far as something to achieve. In addition to that, an apartment and moving out of her parents' house, and feeding her passion, beginning to identify that which makes her the most happy and making sure that she's doing things to feed that in her adult life was important. And then finally, they're developing relationships with people in her life that were important to continue. She was also able to identify some things that she didn't want. She was very concerned about getting more and more in debt. She doesn't like when she feels like a burden to people, especially when she asks them to drive. She doesn't like when anxiety kind of drives what she's doing as opposed to a real goal. And she doesn't like depending on her parents and really wants to be more independent. She is concerned and wants to move away from having a relationship that isn't connected with her brother and sister-in-law. So those were her kind of vision and goals of what she wanted and what she wanted to avoid. She recognized that in her past, some of the best decisions she made, some of the things that are really moving her towards those things that she wants, was that she took the opportunity to go to college. She recognized that her parents and her family gave her opportunities and kind of pushed her towards opportunities of independence. She had a job in college. She had an opportunity to work in the Disability Services Department at her college, and that really gave her that love for working with a not-for-profit and being in the disability community. She had an expectation in her family of academic success, and she was always pushed to do her personal best. But she also noted that in her family, especially with her parents, she was a bit coddled. In addition, at school, there were low expectations because of her disability. She said that often others didn't understand her value, but more importantly, she often didn't understand her own personal value. She was in a car accident that caused some issues that she has to be cautious and keep on track personally so that it doesn't get in her way of what she wants for her good life. She had slow progress in school, and she kind of struggled with low self-esteem. Very quickly, her future pieces that she's looking for, she really wants to pursue full-time work with benefits. She wants to pursue how to finance changing a car and adding hand controls and getting that training. She wants to look at her different therapy options and investigate how she might finance something like that without going to that place that she doesn't want of financial debt. She wants independence in handling her school loans and the process itself. She thinks that if she's not cautious, there are things that will lead her away from what she wants, and one of those is not applying for and becoming more informed around the stable accounts here in Ohio. Watching what debt she continues to incur, not, if she doesn't pursue her driver's license, she won't get what she needs. In addition, not getting full-time employment or staying at home and not moving out and not growing that relationship with her brother. So now she has some real recognizable things that she can kind of put into a to-do list or identify as something that she would work on directly moving forward. So here is her completed trajectory. So this is another one that's just a more simplified one. I don't want folks to get overwhelmed by doing this work. This is a young man who his parents put this one together. It's just the basic trajectory, and it just gives us some basic, what do I want? I want to be self-determined. I want to participate in community activities, and I want to learn to take care of my own medical needs. And what I don't want, people doing things for me, unnecessary medication and unnecessary procedures. And then they very quickly put down things along the trajectory that would, above it, that would keep them on track, and below it, things that would take them away from it. So you don't have to feel as if you have to do an in-depth trajectory necessarily. You can kind of meet yourself where you are with the skills that you're willing to utilize at the time and put something simple together. But it's amazing to see how this impacts where we move forward when we've got a path that's tracked out. So as this work was done in the community of practice and as they were having conversation, one thing that came to light was this idea that when they did trajectories, when they talked about life outcomes, they really kind of did it in the space of what they then referred to as the 6 domains. Daily life and employment, which is basically what am I going to do all day? Community living, where am I going to live? Who am I going to live with? Social and spirituality, who am I going to share my life with? How am I going to do that? Healthy living, that is medical, behavior, health and wellness, safety and security. And that's not only am I able to be independent and keep myself safe, but also the security and financial security. And lastly, citizenship and advocacy. That is, am I a valued member of my community, and am I consciously working with my family and those that support me to identify how to be valuable and teaching me how to be valuable and taking that out into my community. So as you look at these and think about these, I would like Jeremy to help me do another poll with you, that if you had to identify 1 or 2 of these domains that were a priority for you, what would they be? So again, daily life and employment, community living, social spirituality, healthy living, safety and security, or citizenship and advocacy.
And we should note that we only, unfortunately, have 5 options available to us, but certainly advocacy and citizenship are definitely important to some of us, I'm sure, on this call. With that in mind, I do believe that we will go ahead and close the poll now. It looks like the majority of people so far, the majority of people say employment and daily living, followed by community living. Celia, back to you.
Great, and that's not surprising given the LifeCourse stage that we are most focused on, because what we're going to do all day and where we are going to live and where we are going to best be comfortable doing that and contributing is certainly going to be our 2 focuses. So keeping that in mind, once we have a vision, when we talked through this community of practice about what the next steps were, it really was obvious to us that families really struggled. They embraced the idea that we can't continue to go to the eligibility system to meet our needs, because clearly in a lot of cases that wasn't going to be enough. but yet, and they embrace the idea of, yes, we need to be more integrated, we need to look at other areas of ways to get our needs met or to support our families in this way, but at the same time it was a real struggle in how to do it. So one other tool that came out of the work was something that we call the Integrated Supports and Services STAR, because families needed help to think about how to support themselves and support their family members. So the Integrated Service STAR originally was not a star, it was a quadranted or 4-point entity, but that looked at relationships that we had and eligibility services that we could receive and community-based services that might be available and technology and how we use those to help and support ourselves. And it was, it was the family voice again at the table at this community practice that said, hey, you're missing a whole piece here, which is what we can bring to the table personally and what assets we have. And so now it is a star, it's 5 points. And when we think about how to support an individual with a disability or support a family, we look at these 5 things. And I encourage you that if you begin to utilize these tools, one thing that has come out of this work and that folks at the National Community Practice have shared is that initially they didn't even have a star on the piece of paper. They used their 5 fingers. So whenever they were problem solving or looking at an issue, they could look down at their hand and go, okay, I need to think about these 5 things, and use their hand as a reminder. But overall, the community or the Integrated Support STAR was the first tool outside of the trajectory that really gave us an opportunity of how to support families in a tangible, very basic, simple, but amazingly meaningful way. So what happens when we look at the support star? We ask ourselves specific questions. So when we're trying to look at having a good life, we can ask ourselves these questions. What skills or abilities do I have? And what skills and abilities do I need to learn to have an active and inclusive life and a full life that looks like what I want it to look like? Then we can look at the relationship corner of the star and say, am I finding ways to spend time doing things with friends and family or other people I care about? Am I trying to find ways to connect with additional people and create additional friendships around me being valuable to them and giving back to them? The eligibility specific piece is, how can I use the supports from the other parts of the star or to maximize what I already get possibly from the disability system in order to build my inclusive life? Community-based, what places do I go in the community, and what do I do? How do I spend my time? And what activities do I like to do that are accessible to anyone in the community? And then technology, how can I use my phone, my iPad, other technology to access things that I need for support and to be active in my community and stay connected? So I'm going to give a brief example here of how to begin to fill out a star. I often encourage families and individuals to divide the star sections into have and need, because for me, I mentioned before the to-do list that kind of comes from the trajectory. For me, I like this because, again, I'm a to-do person, and it gives me what I can be working on in a pretty simple, basic way relatively quickly. So when we look at having an integrated good life, this person had identified that they had self-determination, they had a good work ethic, a positive attitude, a college degree, and they were a role model for other people with disabilities. They needed to work on their self-confidence. She wanted to get her driver's license. She needed to work better to be financially independent, and she needed to become better at feeding her own passions. Out of relationships, she shared that she has a relationship with her parents and her sister. She has work colleagues and other self-advocates that she's friends with and spends time with. She wanted to work on relationships to better her relationship with her brother and his family. We identified that she should look for a personal mentor and possibly a financial mentor in addition to a therapist. She currently had access to Social Security, but she needed to investigate looking into the stable account, potentially a job coach, and maybe if there's some additional help that she could get through BVR. And that's the Bureau for Vocational Rehab, sorry for the initials. Finally, in community, she needed to look for job fairs, the potential of what information would be available from the driver's license bureau that would help her better move towards having her own driver's license. Possibly investigating a second part-time job to get the additional financing that she wanted, to look for a volunteer position to continue to feed that passion piece that she had up in needing in terms of personal assets, taking a fun class to learn more what she likes, and then looking more into the possibilities for her for transportation that are available in the community. And then lastly, within technology, obviously most of us have a smartphone and a computer, but utilizing that access to technology to look for more financial programs and supports and ways to keep track of money, looking for newsletters that might help me better understand how to pay off a loan quickly, looking for helpful apps, connecting to LinkedIn and Indeed in order to grow my potential for a job. The other piece that became very evident to the community of practice nationally when they had this STAR tool was that it became a problem-solving tool. And this basically is evidenced in a lot of different ways, but it was, again, based on the questions that we can ask. What personal strengths do I have to solve the problems? Who do I have in terms of relationship that can help me solve the problem? What's available in my community to everyone that could help solve the problem, and how can I use technology? And then in addition, obviously with the eligibility, do I have eligibility services based on, and that can be based on not just disability, but also on your age, socioeconomic, and other factors that come into play, gender, things like that. So when you look at this STAR, I always use the analogy of if you were sitting at work and you received a phone call saying that someone who depends on you, at this place I'll say a child, who was supposed to be staying after school, all of a sudden their event after school was canceled, but yet you're in a meeting and aren't going to be leaving until 5 and it's only 3 o'clock. And we have to problem solve. Well, we don't think about the terms of the STAR, but that's what we do. We quickly said, have you missed the bus? So that's an eligibility specific thing. Yes, Mom, the bus has already left. Did you call your dad? That's a relationship, and using your cell phone is a technology thing. Have you thought about what else you can do? That's a personal strength or asset. Can you catch the metro? Can you walk home? Is Bobby's mom there and could bring you home? So you start looking to all these different areas. So I want to share with you a personal story really quick, because I want you to recognize that though these tools were developed with disability in mind and in the disability community, they work for anyone. And this actually was a STAR that was built by my daughter and I at a point of crisis as she was away from home at college as a sophomore and ran into a point where she had her first anxiety attack. She was not she had never been clinically diagnosed with anxiety, but doing what I do, it was very obvious to me that's what it was. And very quickly, I had to get her to a point where she could calm down and address the issue at hand. And we sat on FaceTime and worked a STAR. We divided it into have and need. We wrote anxiety in the middle, and we started recognizing what personal strengths she has to manage where she is and the situation she was in. So she's organized, she thinks ahead, she has friends, she exercises regularly, but we also looked at what she needed, and these were her culprits. She had difficulty accepting that she wasn't perfect, so she needed to be able to say it doesn't have to be perfect every time. She needed to be able to ask for help, things like this. She knew that she had friends at school, a good number of them. She had aunts and her father and I who were out of town. She had a job with the football team, and she had access to the staff on the football team, and then she had an academic counselor. The football team staff was a position that she held off the university. So what we recognized in her relationship-based stuff was that she only had one connection to an adult on the university campus. And so we very quickly identified that she needed to be known to and be able to go to more campus staff people for help. And so then we went into eligibility and said, you're on campus, so therefore you have access to your professors, the dorm staff, the health center, and we began to recognize where she could go for help in this area of eligibility. In eligibility, as far as things that she hadn't touched base with, she was at a Catholic university, and so she had access to all the spiritual pieces that might help her manage her anxiety. She also then looked at the community-based events in the community where the university was held, and she knew she had access to, she could go to movies, she could go shopping. One of the things that came out of it is that she loved going to the pet store and petting puppies. So that became actually something that she does weekly now to manage her anxiety, is just to go to a pet store, a local pet store, and play with the puppies. She needed to identify a gym. She needed to identify a potential counselor in the community, places that she could go off campus, potentially a yoga class. And then typical things of utilizing social media to feel connected, utilizing, daily affirmations that she could get to her phone, and looking into a white noise machine or things like that that could help her manage her anxiety. So it became a very useful tool very quickly, and it empowered her to then look at those need-based things and pick one or two things that she could do herself. And it was the difference within 24 hours was dramatic, because she felt empowered to manage some of the pieces of it on her own. It became clear what to do, but it was something that she drove herself and nobody told her what to do. So often what I do is I suggest to groups that they take an opportunity to do a STAR themselves. It's unfortunate we're not all in a room together to do this, but I encourage you to, there are some attachments that you got because you're part of the webinar. There will be something that's called the profile that will have the expanded trajectory in the center, and it will have integrated support STAR on the back. If you don't know or don't have a current issue that you want to work on, you can put almost anything in the middle of that star. So here I have advocating for my good life. How do I want to go about being an advocate for myself as I start to pursue the things that I want and desire? You could put a particular thing, and the poll told us that there's a lot of folks here that are interested in community life or in daily life and employment. So you could place any domain in the center there, and then start looking at the 5 areas and how to look at what I have and what I need in each of those areas to better set goals for whatever domain it is that you're looking for. But the whole premise of this work is to empower families and empower individuals to recognize that we don't always have to go to what we call the eligibility corner of the star. And we do know that we might not know what's going on moving forward with eligibility and services, but we do know it's changing. And often that can be people can get quite frozen in waiting for whatever it is that I might get. And what we're encouraging families and those that support them to do is to look at these other areas and say, how can I have an impact now? What work can I be doing now, instead of waiting or being frozen by the fact that something's not coming out of that eligibility corner of the star. So I want to encourage you to remember the premise of the framework itself, in that we are all individuals, but we never can be thought of outside the context of our family. Even recognizing that some of us may not even speak to our own family. We have influences from that family that affect who we are and how we operate in the universe moving forward. So we never can look at the individual alone outside the context of the family. And that means those of us who are professionals need to understand that we can't just support the individual, but we have to support family members who are in the individual's life and help them the individual be a better family member too. In addition, we always need to consider the 6 domains, and we're going to prioritize that. We are very seldom managing and making all of these a priority at once. But we do recognize, especially in the areas of problem solving, that it's usually one of them that's a little bit more evident or a little bit more of a priority than maybe others at any given time. We also recognize that when we support families, we're doing one of 3 things. We are usually connecting them and helping them navigate a system and learn more and gain information, or we are connecting them to people and networks and other supports, or we're helping them get connected to goods and services. So we always know, we call these the 3 buckets, that we're always supporting families and family members out of these 3 buckets. So again, you could take a bucket and put it in the center of a star and say, what do I need in terms of discovery and navigation? What information do I need, and how can I problem solve around knowing more and how to find what I need, for example? Or a trajectory. What does the good life around connecting with people and relationship with people in my needs for support look like, and how do I create a good life trajectory around that? And lastly, we need to recognize that there are 5 places where we can look for supports, that we don't always have to look to that eligibility specific corner of the star to answer those questions. I want to tell you that the tools are available for free. You can print out any tools, and there's additional tools available that I didn't get to introduce today because of the brevity of the webinar. The website that you want to go to is lifecoursetools.org, and you will find a number of great ways to start this brainstorming and opportunities to think about integrated supports and what they might look like, or vision planning in any domain. So those are available to anybody for free. I also offer the ability for me to work with these tools. If you want to contact me, my information will be at the end of the webinar, and you can certainly contact me and I can help you work through this, because with the webinar we don't have the benefit of doing a hands-on type of activity with this presentation. I want to tell you that this, as I stated at the beginning, is work that's being done across the state of Ohio. I am charged with bringing the LifeCourse Framework and creating a community practice around supporting families in Southern Ohio, in addition to the Northeast region. And Kim Weimer is a contact at DODD that is overseeing all the work across the state overall. Lastly, I will give you one more time, my USAID website, the lifecoursetools.org, and supports2families.org, and that is the website where you would find additional information about the community of practice nationally. You also can find a copy of the Wingspread report, but I believe that you received that as a handout with this webinar, and I encourage you to read it, if for no other reason. I just find that especially family members and individuals with disability, it's comforting to know that there is a group of folks in the United States that get it and that have come together and said, this is what families need.
Okay, thank you, Celia. We're now going to begin answering the questions submitted during today's presentation. So Jeremy's going to read the questions aloud, and then Celia, if you want to turn on your webcam, they can see your pretty face and we can answer those questions.
All right, the first question comes from Katie Black, and she asks, if, for example, an incident happens that knocks us off the trajectory, what or who can we turn to who will get us back on track?
Okay, so to answer your question, I think the ideal situation, everybody is individualized, so who I would turn to would be different than who you would turn to, but I think that's the beauty of the star in looking at, if you place whatever the incident is that's knocked you off the trajectory, then you can look at those things that are going to help you get back. So let's say, for example, I got knocked off the trajectory simply because I've noticed that in school my executive functioning issues have become more than I can manage, and I'm going to look at, say, okay, who can I turn to? Currently, at the time, let's say I wasn't receiving any direct school supports. I got a 504, but I really didn't have any direct support. So who could I turn to? Well, I could turn to my IEP team, or not my IEP team. I could turn to my intervention specialist who's aware of my 504. I could ask for an evaluation, so that would be my school psychologist. I also could just turn to a few of my peers who are doing well in a class and ask for help there. So it varies with each person in each situation. But I think that's where the star really comes in and can be handy.
Sounds good. All right. The other question that's been submitted so far through the questions is from Beth Yantek, who asks, is there a resource that we can get that asks more questions like the one shown on the star page to generate more discussion?
So I think what you're thinking of, Beth, possibly, or what I think of when you ask that question, is there is something called the question and answer book. It is available at lifecoursetools.com, and it may have been included in your handout. That booklet is just such a rare find. I just love the way it's laid out. Please know it's not exhaustive, but you will open that booklet and you will find each domain divided across the life course. And it works with what they call anticipatory guidance, and it begins to ask those exact questions. If my child is school-aged, what should I be thinking about and working on, and questioning myself if we've done enough about employment and daily living? Or if I'm at transition, what should I be thinking about? Or if I'm looking at community living, what skills should I be building when I'm at transition age? Or what can I be thinking about if I'm an adult in the community and want to better improve my community living? So it is broken down by domain, by life course stage. It's not exhaustive, but it really gives families some identifiable questions that turn into identifiable next steps or points on the trajectory. So it's a nice tool.
I've got a few in front of me here. Are there resources you could recommend to help me understand and identify my strengths?
Oh, that's a good question. I think for me, I would recommend that you go to folks that are in your life. If you're of transition age, I would not only utilize family members, but I would look to schools and teachers. And that's the beauty of these tools, is often we have families and they not only have the child fill out the star or the trajectory, but the parents. And when you print out trajectories, you can get them off of lifecoursetools.com to be a family trajectory or an individual trajectory. So again, you can start talking about, if this is our good life for our family, but this is the good life of what you want, looking at both of those and having an impact of how they affect each other is hugely important. But when you're looking at trying to learn your own personal strengths, I think it would be important to give a star about a particular area to those people in your life that you respect, who know you well, because we often have trouble identifying our own personal assets, but those around us know what we're good at and are able to point that out to us.
Yeah, and Beth Yantek actually points out that online tests can help identify underlying strengths. And for me personally, I'm online a lot, so maybe I should find some of those. How could I involve others, such as family, teachers, and healthcare providers, in helping me create such a plan?
I think the getting skilled with the tools on your own is hugely important, especially from the standpoint of, I just have had some real strong feedback from families when they utilize these tools at school, especially in transition, to start identifying where our child or our family member wants to be. And when we're having those real conversations about IEP goals around transition, or opportunities to help us figure out where it is that we're headed or what we want to do, and identifying those as places in the community or through school connections that we can receive help identifying our skills or having experiences that are going to then impact our points along the trajectory, it's hugely effective. And so I've seen families go in and really have real conversation around where it is that we are headed for our good life and how we can then build points on the trajectory through the IEP process. It also empowers family members and families themselves, because it's the individual, it's the child on the IEP, whose IEP it is, having a voice to say and put in front of them, this is what I want, this is where I'm headed, these are the things that are important to me. And it becomes very powerful, and at the same time, I'm amazed at how it neutralizes. Often when we get in these discussions, it can become an us-them on the IEP team, and it really does neutralize this, and we often kind of talk about the fact that we need to really remember who this is about, and I think that the trajectory makes that so clear that that doesn't get as quickly forgotten.
You know what? And that provides a perfect segue to another question. How do I evaluate my progress, or is there a timeline component to keep me on track?
I think the timeline component is entirely up to you, and I think sometimes we can be our our own worst enemy and believing that everything should happen quickly. I think that as you work the expanded trajectory and you begin to identify those things that you can place in your future that will keep you along the line of the trajectory, and picking those things, sometimes this can be really overwhelming. And so often I say pick the simplest, easiest thing. You might, for example, when we were looking at Katie's trajectory, she might personally say, until I get this car thing taken care of, nothing else is going to work. But that might be one of the hardest hurdles. So looking at that list of things that we think needs to be in our future to totally take us towards what that desired life is, sometimes picking some of the baby steps to reinforce our confidence in that we can handle this and that we've got this and we are making progress might be much more important than doing it in a short period of time. I also never ever think this should be done alone. I strongly encourage that this be group work, either within your family or within a group of peers and adults that you trust. And that creates a sense of accountability. I also encourage families to do it together because, again, that accountability and the bouncing of ideas, it's amazing what you'll learn.
All right, sounds good. And final question we have here, where can I go to learn about the community resources, easy for me to say, that are available to me?
Again, I think there's no one magical place to go to learn about those. I can tell you that in just this work, I have learned about a ton of resources. The other thing that I think that I would encourage you to do, of something that I can identify right off the bat, would be to become part of the Southwest community of practice, because those conversations are happening about what already exists in Southwest Ohio, in addition to what is it that we really need? What isn't here? What kind of things do families need? And how can we build that?
All right, I believe that is it. So with that, Diane, final thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, Celia, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, Charting the Life Course. If you have any other questions that you didn't think of while we were having the presentation this evening, please email sbccincy with a Y at sbccincy.org. Our next webinar in the Create Your Future series is Achieving Social Continence with Dr. Brian Vanderbrink from Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center, Urology Department. Look for registration information to come out in the next few weeks. On behalf of the Spina Bifida Coalition of Cincinnati, the UC-USED, our presenters, and the Hatton Foundation, we thank you for joining us. Now go create your future.